This conference will now be recorded.
The day that I'm 10 minutes early, we don't have a quorum. So what's up with that, people? Four, and we have 3. Is there anybody online from the commission? Can you state your name? We think Joe will be absent today and Cindy may be absent. Good morning. Welcome to the Thursday, September 1st Advanced Plans Committee meeting. We do not have a quorum, but in the interests of a very heavy agenda, I'm going to suggest that we begin with the non-action items, specifically Unified Zoning Code update on the solar energy conversion systems, which Scott will present. This is really a preliminary look as solar fields become a thing. I live next to one, so this is the thing I'm most interested about on the agenda today. So, you want to proceed, and then we'll note when we have a quorum to go back to the top of the agenda.
You bet, and thank you for being willing to pivot on this one. So you'll see, I'll talk just in general real quick about the items on your agenda. You're going to see, you see a lot of items. You've been provided a lot of material. But what we're going to do is, I believe most of those we can, we're checking in with you. So it's not that we need a formal action. So I think we can go through those fairly quickly. This one, as mentioned, was we're talking about a change to the zoning code, specifically for solar energy conversion systems. So you can think of the solar arrays, and they're there primarily just to produce electricity. You're thinking of a field of them. These are not solar arrays that are installed on top of a roof, or we saw a school district in Mays where they had installed a solar array. It was an accessory use. It wasn't the primary use of the location. So we are talking really about the ones where these are solar arrays, and that's the primary use of the property. All right, next slide, please. So what we're looking for from you all today is just we're checking in to make sure that we're on track with the right process. So we've got a proposed process I'd like to review with you, and that we're on track with the proposed changes to the Unified Zoning Code. So those are really the 2 major things that we're looking for from you all today. Next slide. So in 2019, the Unified Zoning Code and the Comprehensive Plan were both updated to address renewable energy systems, and that was both wind and solar. You'll remember that for wind, it primarily looked at saying Sedgwick County, it's not an appropriate use here in Sedgwick County to have wind farms. But solar is one that is available for folks to do. And so next slide. And so what we have in the Unified Zoning Code is solar renewable energy systems, and there are about 20 requirements of supplemental information that an applicant will need to submit with any application for a zone change to permit solar arrays in the county and in the city. So what happened though is we've had questions come up about this is a lot of information. It's pretty detailed, and it will take quite a bit of time and research in order to produce that. So the question came up, Well, that seems like that's appropriate for very large scale solar arrays. But what do we do about ones that are smaller scale? And specifically look about 20 acres or less. And that's really been the question that's prompted this. Next slide. So with that question, we went and we looked at how some national guidance, we looked at what some other jurisdictions are doing, most notably Johnson County, Douglas County. And so we were just kind of looking to see what is the state of the practice. And what we found is that many of them reflect the conditions that we have as part of our application submission process. And in fact, there were some that have gone beyond that with additional requirements. So we created this table where we kind of looked at those and kind of mapped all that out. Next slide. But in reviewing that, we really, as a committee, as a staff team, we looked at this and we said, we thought that the conditions that were already addressed in the Unified Zoning Code were really appropriate for our community, really met our community needs. But in thinking about the question about what do we do about the smaller scale solar arrays, we looked at that and we said, well, we think that it is appropriate to have these 20 conditions for the very large scale operations, but for the smaller ones, we didn't really see that all of those conditions fit. And so what you're going to see in the draft that is attached to your staff report and also available online for those who have joined online as part of the agenda packet, what you're going to see is that instead of just one category, there's now 4 different categories for solar energy conversion systems. And we've broken it down into city large scale, city small scale, county large scale, and county small scale. And the way that those are distinguished is really by their size. So for city large scale, that's anything, I believe, 3 acres and above, and for county large scale, that's above 20 acres. And so what you'll be able to see is, I'm not going to go through that in this PowerPoint presentation about exactly what is and what isn't in, but what you can do is you can see through the striked out copy, the edited copy, you'll see the conditions for the application that are supplemental information that is no longer, would not be required for the small scale applications. Next slide. One more thing about the edits also, what you will find in your packet in the proposed edits and changes is that we also clarify the definition of solar energy conversion system. We also specify that they are not, that the large scale facilities intended for energy generation are not accessory uses. So we better define what's an accessory use when it comes to solar and what isn't. So those are that's a quick high level overview about what the proposed changes are in the Unified Zoning Code. I'm going to fast forward now to the input process, and I know that you can't read this, so I'm going to do my best to kind of describe the boxes. So today, where we are is we're at MAPC Advanced Plans. We're checking in with you all on this process and on the proposed changes. The next step that we have outlined is to go and talk to a specific solar stakeholder. This was an individual who had commented during the last round of changes about what about some tweaks, what about some changes here. We want to find out what their feedback was about the original one. This is also an individual who's come in with a couple of different solar companies to ask questions about regulations here in Sedgwick County and how that might fit for some conceptual projects. So we want to find out kind of what their feedback is on it. Then we would like to take it to Board of County Commission staff meeting. This is an opportunity for all the commissioners to hear about the details of the proposed changes, also process, and then also take it to the briefings with individual council members so that they're aware of what the proposed changes are. Because again, although this primarily would affect, at least in my anticipation, would primarily affect the county, because again, we're talking about solar arrays that are set up for energy generation purposes. The change does affect the city, and because it's a unified joint city code, you're going to see both county commission and city will be involved. So then after that, we are proposing to do a meeting or an event to get input from solar stakeholders. and then eventually to take it out to any small cities that would like to get information, take it out to the citizen advisory boards with the county, and then also take it out to the district advisory boards with the city. So we're going to collect all that feedback, and then we're going to gather it up in a report. We're going to bring that information back to you to say, here's what was proposed, here's what we heard about that, and then any proposed changes, you'll have an opportunity to make any modifications, suggest any changes, and then later on take it to the full MAPC and then to the governing bodies. Okay, next slide, please. So again, the recommended action on your part is to give us feedback about the process, also to give us feedback, any thoughts that you've got on the draft changes. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Any question? Go ahead, Mr. Dewell.
Yes, I'm interested in what Evergy may have to say about this. Are they willing to buy an unlimited amount of solar energy?
Yeah, I don't know. We would like to invite them to come to a solar stakeholders input session and see what their thoughts are on it. We've not had any formal dialogue with them about this, so I'm interested to know what their thoughts are. Yeah.
Is it a solar array has to be near either a substation or the direct user? So like in Maze's high school standpoint, they're directly using it in their facilities. But the others, are they always going to be near a substation? Is that accurate?
I don't have a definite answer on that, but I do know that since they're generating electricity, they need to plug into the electrical grid at some point. And so that's what we've seen so far, is that they are looking at those substation locations.
Because those have already, met some criteria, it seems like that. All right, other questions on the solar array? I think because this is just a preliminary review, we don't take public comment typically. Do we want to allow just time for a few questions?
It's up to you all. You have discretion either way.
I see a hand in the room, so let's go ahead and just a couple minutes for any questions. Could we have you go to the podium, please? Thanks for joining us. And then we'd like your name and address so that we can keep you in the loop on further action on this item.
My name is Lee, spelled L-E-A, McLeod, M-C-C-L-O-U-D. I am the president of the Benjamin Hills Pleasant Valley Neighborhood Association. And I just yesterday got notice of this meeting, so I wanted to come to inform our constituents. My main question is, because we do track things through our DAB, at what point, time-wise, in his little input process, would there still be a point for, like, when it goes to DAB, it can still be changed, I assume, or for public input? About how far out from now do you expect DABs to receive this?
That's an excellent question. The only person in the room who might be able to answer that is Scott. And again, by giving us your name and contact information, we'll be able to keep you in the loop as this progresses. But Scott, do you have any definitive response?
We don't. We've mapped out the process in terms of stages and which groups we would hope to go to, but we don't have any specific dates associated with that. So the best resource is going to be to keep in touch with the planning department. We'll have a more refined and updated schedule as we continue through the process, but at this point, we don't have any specific dates. But
timeline with this input process would be nice.
Sure, yeah, no, you bet. And the other thing too is if you'd like, we're more than happy to come out and give presentations to groups if a neighborhood association or other would like to get this information in a different setting.
Okay, great. Any other questions or input at this time? If not, we will now, we do have a quorum. Thank you, Cindy Miles, for joining us online. Mr. McKay has joined us in person. So could I have action or could I entertain a motion for the handling of the meeting minutes from our previous meeting?
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve in the room for Mr. Hartman. We'll take Cindy Miles' action as a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Hearing none, minutes are approved. We'll move on to the presentation of the MAPC bylaws update. Justin Wagner, Assistant County Counselor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Justin Wagner, Assistant County Counselor. I presented a special Planning Commission meeting where we talked about the bylaws, the proposed changes to these bylaws. I'm just going to go through, I think there are really 4 changes that were made to them, very minor in scope. Thumbing through the, sorry, is there a way to arrow down? I'm going to go to page 3 of the document, the track changes document that you'd have in front of you. One of the changes was in section 3A on the emergency meetings provisions. There was a suggestion that the word exclusively, in terms of exclusive virtual attendance, be changed to primarily virtual attendance, which is in line with the Kansas administrative regulation the AG's office helped promulgate at the start of COVID-19 pandemic. So that change has been made. That's the first one. The second change is really throughout the document. The term chairman has been modified to a gender neutral term of chair. So that's a handful of places throughout the document. The third change would be on page 5, towards the bottom of the page in section 9. Just removing some of the language that was in there that caused potentially some First Amendment concerns about, if somebody said something bad about planning commissioners and things like that. The reality is that to a certain degree, they're able to do that as long as they're not using profanity, vulgarity, things along those lines. So that language has been deleted. The fourth item would be on the next page, page 6. This was under section 10B. We modified that to clarify that planning commissioners would not participate as a member if you have a property or a business that you own that has a property that's got an application in front of the planning commission. You would have to abstain from the matter, but you may still participate as an applicant on your own property. We just wanted to clarify that. And other than that, everything else is the same as what you saw during that special meeting. I'd be happy to stand for any questions you might have.
Mr. McKay.
On the last thing you talked about, used to years ago, when being in the development business, if I had a thing coming before the planning commission, I had to upfront abstain plus give a definite statement where I was either going to participate or not as the client. In other words, I don't think that's in there now.
I think you're correct, Commissioner. I don't believe that we have anything that says, let me reread how this is worded.
I don't know if that was just to take at will, if that's what was going to happen, or that was one of the rules. But I know I had to do that a number of times on Auburn Hills out west.
And in particular, Commissioner McKay, are you asking about when you would abstain? You'd say you're not. Can you restate how exactly the mechanics of that?
Well, when I'm on any issue, I would say I understand, but I'm going to abstain. I will abstain. If you're an applicant, I'm really abstaining, and I would like to reserve the right to participate as the applicant, with the applicant.
And I think
so. That's a clarification that I'm abstaining, but I do have a vested interest in it, and going to be able to. You're just saying what you want to do anyhow up front.
Sure, and I think that that's still okay to do. I think. Really, that some of these tweaks in the bylaws recognize the fact that you may be a property owner who wants to change the zoning on your property, and of course you're going to abstain. I still think it would be wise on the record to do what you've said. I don't think you have to reserve the right. I think you're given the right as a property owner to apply for a zone change on it. But I think any statements you'd want to make on that could be helpful just for clarity.
Well, that was just for the public purpose to stand with. Well. You probably remember my granddaughter had the patio home, the tiny home Well, I abstained and I left the room because I didn't want to even be around because it was very, very controversial. At that point in time, I said I could have participated, but I chose not to.
And I think that's a fair route to take, what you did on that, Commissioner McKay, to yeah. It's not in there now as a requirement. If the planning commission wanted to restrict it that way, I mean, that's something you could consider, but the thought process was that you may have a time where you would be disadvantaging members of the planning commission where they would have to fully dissociate themselves, not as, I mean, clearly they would as a planning commissioner, but just as a property owner. And really you have property rights like other people do. And so I think what you did in that matter with your granddaughter makes sense in terms of if you would prefer to, it's not required legally, but if you would prefer to have no involvement while the decision making is occurring, you can do that. But it's certainly not required in these bylaws. I'd be happy to answer any other questions on that or suggestions on best practices.
Any other questions for Attorney Wagner on this item?
All right.
We had very thorough review, so thank you for that. And appreciate the addition of the opportunity for continued virtual participation, which was probably the most major change in these bylaws. We are starting to follow a new protocol for our committee meetings, which is on action items that are going to go forward, that we would call for public comment up to 3 minutes for anyone present who would like to speak on this item or have questions or additional input. So I will call for that public comment, then we'll move to our committee discussion, motion, and second. So any public participants who would like to make a comment on the bylaw changes, anyone here present? I see no heads nodding. Anyone virtual who would like to speak on this item, please state your name. Hearing none, I will bring it back to the committee. Any further discussion on this item before we call for a motion and we be asking that this go forward to the full MAPC for an action?
And ideally, you'd be recommending approval. So then the MAPC will know that you all have reviewed it one more time and what your thoughts are.
I will make that motion, whatever Scott said.
All right, John McKay. John McKay's move that we move approval of the bylaw changes to the full MAPC at its next meeting, and a second from Mr. Duell. All in favor, or is there any discussion at this point of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Cindy, I haven't heard your voice. Okay. That all opposed, same sign. Everybody's who's here said aye. So this motion passes. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, Scott is making his way back up to talk about a unified zoning code update for home occupation daycare. This again is a action item. Take it away, Scott.
And
Yes,
I was an aye on that vote.
Okay. Usually I hear your voice loud and clear, Cindy, and I didn't that time. So thanks for clarifying. We'll add you to the number of affirmative votes. All right, go ahead.
Okay, well,
Scott?
this one is very similar to what you've seen in terms of changes to the unified zoning code. Again, this one's for home occupation daycares. We'll cover a little bit about what that means. And the great thing is that there are folks here in the room who can speak to the need for this. But what I would point out is that just today there was a news headline that indicated that it's a 2-year wait for anyone who's looking for childcare. So, so again, experts in the room who can cover this much more in depth than I can in terms of the need. But what I'd like to go through is just talk to you about what some of the proposed changes are, and then we'll see what questions you have. So next slide, please. So this one on the staff report, and I may have gotten a little bit ahead of myself, but I want to present to you some options that you have, and also what our proposed process is. So you've got the option, as always, of providing feedback, and we look for your feedback, both on what's being proposed in terms of changes, but also in terms of the process. You also, at any time, have the ability that you can recommend to the MAPC, the full MAPC, that they would recommend approval by both the governing bodies. So you've really got a couple of different options today. In our staff report, we had written it up that you would recommend approval by the MAPC, but I got to looking at the process, which we're going to cover in just a little bit, and there may be reason why you may want to hold off on that for just a couple of weeks or a few weeks. So with that in mind, I'll take you through this, and then you can let me know if you have questions, what your thoughts are. So next slide, please. So the existing code, we have daycares listed in our code, and JR is always very quick to point out that it's spelled out as two different words, daycare instead of one. But so if you're looking for it, just know that. So we have general and we have limited, and the big difference there is it really comes down to the number of children that can be looked after in the daycare environment. So if it's 10 or fewer, then it's limited. If it's more than 10, then it is general. And there are different locations that they can be in terms of the zoning table and which zoning districts, but in all, the limited one is the one that we're looking at today, and you'll see the proposed changes there. The other thing too is that home occupation comes into this, because when we talk about the daycare limited, we're really talking about home, for the most part, home occupation, so daycares that would be operated out of a home. So next slide. So here's the definition of daycare limited. Again, it's a home occupation, no more than 10 individuals. So I've already spelled that out, and that's in your staff report as well. So next slide. So home occupation. So one of the things I know that you always weigh when it comes to a zoning case or when it comes to home occupations in general is, again, we're looking at them as an incidental and accessory use in the home. So the primary use would be for a residence, not necessarily for the daycare. And then that you're always looking to balance quality of life for the neighbors as well. So ensuring that they don't have an adverse effect on the integrity of the residential and rural areas. And as part of your packet, we included a big section on home occupations that kind of talks about that more in depth. But I thought that this section really got to kind of the heart of the issue, which is you're balancing the ability to provide these services out of a home, also with the quality of life for the neighbors around. Next slide. So what we're proposing, well, what the impact right now is that daycare limited is allowed by right in almost all zoning districts. That again, we've talked about the 10 individuals, so no more than 10. That if it's zoned SF5 or SF10, then the daycare is not allowed to have another employee except for a substitute. So what that means is that there's one employee who is operating the daycare, unless they've got a substitute, maybe they're taking a break or something and the person is there to be the substitute, or maybe that individual gets sick and so they have a substitute come in and take care of the kids while they're away. And I highlight that. That's important to note because we're proposing a change to that, and you'll see that in just a moment. And then if a home occupation daycare would like to have additional employees under the current zoning code, they would have to apply for a conditional use. And if they're granted that, then they would be considered a daycare general, not a daycare limited. The other option that they have if they want to do this is they could always ask for a variance, but variances are difficult to get. There's a lot of, I just think that that's a more challenging process than a conditional use. So next slide. So what we are proposing is we are proposing to change the code so that daycare limited would allow up to 12 students or pupils, and then that there could be 2 employees. So one being the person who resides there and another one being a second employee. So those are the major changes that you will see. And I'm going to take a moment and just flip to the staff report because I think that all of that is spelled out. In the attachments, we've got the home occupation section. There's quite a bit of text to that. And then on looks like page 12 of that packet, you're going to see daycare, what the definition is for daycare general, daycare limited. You're going to see that we spell out the number of employees, no more than 2 individuals. And then you'll see parking as the last section there. And what we do is parking, it's spelled out there, and we changed the enrollment to above 12, but then on loading, because we know that sometimes there are loading spaces that are necessary, that would only occur if there's more than 13. So in general, a daycare limited, even with the new amount of 12 students, would not be required to have a loading space. So I know parking comes up. I just want to let you know that we've addressed it. We feel like we've addressed it well. But again, the gist of it is to allow for an increase in the number of students that can be there. Yes, sir.
So what prompted the increase?
Yes, that was part of, that was in response to some requests about the current conditions that we're seeing in our community, 2-year waits, and what could be done to help address that. And I'll leave it to the folks who have more insights about that to address it further.
Yes, Mr. Dewell.
In the material that was sent out, I think there was a reference to the reasoning being to bring this into conformance with state codes.
That is correct. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Dewell. So the state does allow up to 12. And so our code was restricting that down to 10. So there was a mismatch between what KDHE would allow you and what our zoning code would allow. So this would bring that into conformance. Excellent point. Thank you.
As far
And I
as
think
Good. Mr. Hartman was already speaking, and then we'll call on Cindy. Go ahead, Mr. Hartman.
so as far as the parking requirement, they can use their driveway, or can they use on-street parking?
They would have to be off-street. Now, if they wanted to, and they can use their driveway for that as long as it's outside the setback, which is standard parking, the way that we calculate parking for other cases. As always, though, if they wanted to, they could request a reduction in the parking requirement, and that would require a parking study. So what we would look for from them is a document that would explain why, the rationale behind why they feel that they can address the parking in a different way. And that could very likely be through on-street parking that is often available. Or it could be maybe they've got a neighbor who's willing to allow for them to park there, or some other shared parking. But we leave it pretty flexible. They do have that process. Again, it's more paperwork, but we like to provide that flexibility for folks.
Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm glad we're addressing this, because with my involvement in the child care initiatives, we have such a shortage of child care facilities, mainly because we've lost hundreds and hundreds of home child care facilities. So I'm glad that we're addressing this.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments at this time? Then we would call for public comment. We have anyone in the room who'd like to present? Please come forward, state your name and address, please, for the record. And you'll have 3 minutes, but I won't count until we get you to the podium.
My name is Tanya Bullock. I'm with Child Start here in Wichita, and I'm so happy to be here. So this does stem from 2 different things. One, Kansas Department of Health and Environments across the state does have this licensed at 12 children in the program, and that does meet minimum standards of health and safety and quality. So we would love to line up with that. But I think an even bigger issue We have a childcare crisis, especially here in the city of Wichita and Sedgwick County. So I'm going to give a little bit of data just to show the kind of crisis we have here locally. We have 38% of the families we serve being met right now. So of 100% of the families, we're only meeting 38% of the demand right here in Sedgwick County. That means about 17,600 children under the age of 5 are potentially needing childcare. What we do know is we have over 600 programs in Wichita or in Sedgwick County that are licensed qualified programs. 304 of those programs are family childcare programs. When we surveyed them, 110 of those right now that are licensed would love to go to this higher license, so the 12. So if we already know that we have programs that are willing to increase their slots and help us meet this demand, I think we need to support this crisis if we can right now. And then we're partnered with childcare licensing here, Adrienne Ladd and her team, and we're really trying to combat this issue and increase programs and build them up. Vice Mayor Tuttle is a huge advocate, and we've been going around trying to increase the awareness as well. So we appreciate that, but this really is a big problem, and I think it really is a simple change, but a big change that could make a big difference in our slots and supporting our families.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for Ms. Bullock from the commission? That's great information to have and to see how this could have an impact. I'm curious, does that your license means you're meeting all the requirements?
Yes.
So if an increase to 12 children suddenly caused a provider to not be able to provide quality service, the licensure process is really what governs and ensures that things are continuing to be satisfactory.
Correct.
And the parents, right?
Correct.
The ultimate.
And all of us who are out here watching and supporting.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Ms. Bullock? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Anyone virtual? Hearing none, I'd bring it back to the committee. Question for Scott, Mr. McKay.
Yes, sir.
This may not be for you, but with this allowing 2 more students and 1 more teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there any square foot requirements? In other words, is there any of these schools that would be kicked out because?
I believe that the short answer is that it will come up to the licensing is based on the amount of square footage that they've got.
No, I would just, well, the reason I asked the question is because I would hate to see somebody turned down because the square footage is just, I didn't know if there's a square footage requirement per person, like there is in a restaurant or something that effect.
If I could, I'll defer to Adrienne, the staff person for the city of Wichita in the Public Works Department who does the inspections. So Adrienne, if you're there.
I'm here. There is a regulation, they need 25 square foot per child in their homes. If they have a smaller home, KDHE can restrict their license. Maybe they only have enough space for 11 children. Then we can restrict it to 11 based on their square footage.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. Also, Adrienne,
Yes.
do you routinely receive complaints about the loading time and congestion and that kind of thing? Because that to me could be, 2 potential drop-offs. What kind of experience do we have on complaints from neighbors?
I've been doing this for almost 15 years and I've never received a complaint from neighbors regarding parking or loading or unloading. Their concerns, we've got a few that maybe the parent wasn't watching their child as they were leaving the home daycare, but nothing specific on the licensed home.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other questions? All right, bring it back to the commission.
I'm sorry, just before
Yes,
you do.
Scott. We need to talk about process.
Yeah, one thing I failed to do, I guess in the rush to get this together, we didn't have it in the PowerPoint. But in terms of process, oh, there it is. Thank you, Ty Ben. So where we are today is we are at the MAPC advanced plans. What I would like to do is go to briefings with each of the council members to make sure that in their minds we're meeting the community needs, and so that they're aware of this discussion of this initiative. And then where I'd like to go is work with Adrian and others to see if we could get perhaps an informational session, a comment session for daycare stakeholders. So this could be parents if they're interested, it could be daycare providers, just to see if folks have questions about what's being proposed and just take care of any issues or see if there's anything that we're missing. And then I don't know if we would take it to the DABs. I've got that drawn up in the process, but in the briefings with the council members, I think we'll get a better handle on that. And then bring any and all comments that we receive back to you all for you to consider whether or not any changes are needed before we take it then to the full MAPC and then to both governing bodies.
Very thorough update on what's going on and the process.
That's correct.
Okay.
And you have the option also, you can say, because we are looking for feedback, you can say, look, Scott, we don't think this is that big of a deal. We want to go ahead and move and say, let's recommend approval to the MAPC. You always have that option. I would rather come up and give you the thorough option so that you can consider both. But we look to you to kind of help provide insights about what's meeting the community needs, both in terms of changes, but also in terms of dialogue and process.
Again, bring it back to the commission. What's your thought in this regard?
The only thing that to me would be a stumbling block would probably be the DABs, because you're dealing with such a diversification of people and wants and not wants.
I guess my thought is that the KDH&E has made the change that this is an appropriate number of kids. They have tons of regulations in this area. I don't know why we wouldn't, seeing the need, proceed to make our city rules match the state requirements. So, yes,
I'm
Mr.
in
Hartman.
agreement with getting more feedback, like you said, and hearing from stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
Any other input on this issue?
My only question is, does anybody on the committee here have any problems with any of this? And I'd like to suggest that we move it forward.
Is that a motion, Mr.
I'll
McKay,
make a motion that
to?
we move it forward as written at this point in time.
And I want to second that.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the changes per staff recommendation. Second from Ms. Miles. All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, any other discussion before we proceed?
Oh, sorry.
Recognizing that there would be some input between now and the next MAPC meeting and then to city council. So you'd still have time to go to every commissioner.
That's correct. I think we would still go and do the briefings with the council members at least. And then that'd give them an opportunity to provide us feedback if we need to adjust.
All right. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. And thank you for participating and providing your input. Appreciate that, Tanya. The clock on the wall didn't get fixed like I thought, so it really isn't still 10 o'clock. It is 10:45. And our next item would be duplex design staff report. This is an item for feedback only. Take it away, Scott.
Yeah, this is an item that you've seen quite a number of times already. I'm not going to take a lot of time to go into depth about it. What we're really here today to talk about is the process, continuing the conversation. And so Ty Ben, if we can go to the next slide, and then the next slide. So this is the process that's proposed at this point, and I'm bringing this to you just to get your feedback on whether you think this is appropriate or whether you think we need to make tweaks. I'm not even going to go any further in this PowerPoint. It's like 70 slides long, but I don't want to go through all that unless you have questions or comments that you'd like to share. But this most recently, where we've been is had a meeting with 3 of the council members, individuals who are in the construction business of doing infill development for duplexes. And there were comments about the challenges that having the design standards creates and hardships for them in terms of doing the infill. And there was discussion about further deliberation and consideration of this. And so the planning department, we are no longer including a recommendation in our staff reports regarding design guidelines or recommendations for duplexes in the established central area. We've been doing that previously, but after this meeting and based on the comments and feedback, we agreed to not put that in. And we've received feedback that the council would like to weigh in on this. And so in order to get an opportunity for this to be presented to the council, we're proposing the following process. So we're here today at Advanced Plans this morning. What we would like to do is see if you're interested in scheduling a meeting or perhaps at an already scheduled advanced plans meeting, providing an opportunity for public comment on this issue. And so this would be something that we would advertise with folks. I see Wes is here from WABA, so we would certainly be reaching out to him and WABA to have see if they would like to come and provide comments, perhaps Wichita area realtors, neighborhood associations, and then also the Places for People committee members. And the intent is to get robust input into this and then take it then to MAPC and then ultimately to the city council for the council to provide direction on it, or at least comment on it. So that in essence is the presentation. I'll stand for any questions.
Yes, Mr. Duell.
So the design aspect that you were talking about refers to staff comment or staff comments being presented. That wouldn't preclude discussion on a particular application regarding the suitability of the design and consideration by the MAPC in making their decision, would it?
That is correct. It is a recommendation that is put into the staff reports for each individual case. And so we've got some statistics now that we've seen some that have been approved without that recommendation being included. And we've seen some that have been approved with that recommendation being included. And also what we have seen is we have seen some that have been approved with not a recommendation, but rather a requirement by the council. And so I think those were the ones that we heard about that were creating some hardship for challenges for folks who are doing the infill.
Mr. Hartman.
So does this mean that we will no longer have these requirements when we're approving these plans?
Excellent question. That's actually the heart of the issue, is whether or not it's appropriate for staff to continue to include a recommendation for specifically really duplexes in the ECA about design, the design features. So that's what all of this is really leading up to, is checking in with advanced plans, see what you all think about it, and then checking in with the MAPC to see what the MAPC as a whole thinks about the appropriateness of that, and then ultimately with the city council.
As a member of the urban or the committee that spent 2 years on this, my frustration is that there was so much opportunity for input. There was a 50-something, there was a very large committee, and we spent almost 3 years, and the recommendations for design requirements were if and when zoning would give some extra help then, or that the zoning process would be by right rather than through the MAPC process if the requirements were met. And I feel like that was what would incentivize a builder or developer to look at this differently. So my question for you, and I recognizing all that's on your plate, how much time would it take to get the zoning code changed if we continue to focus on that coming first? Scott, can you give us an idea of that?
Sure. It's difficult to judge at this time. We do have a draft, and the draft is largely built on the design guidelines that we recommend for these cases, for these types of duplexes. I think that would, given the feedback that we've received on some of the developments that have come through and been approved with those, I think that there are adjustments that probably are needed. The difficulty is the amount of staff time that would be necessary for it, and also even our skill set to a certain degree. And so right now in advanced plans, for instance, we have Stephen Banks, who's getting ready to retire. We have Mary, who's leading the group, and then we have a vacant position that we're currently hiring for. So plus we just recently at our last closing on Monday, this Monday had 22 cases that were submitted for your October, I think, 5th meeting. So we're staying very busy on the current plans, which reduces the amount of resources that we have for advanced plans. So.
And how many cases in the past year were related to duplex approval or increase? And so, I mean, there's where it almost feels like the number of cases we've seen that were to increase from single family to T3 or whatever has really been high as well. So I guess I throw that out to you just to raise the question, could we prioritize that, and would it have a significant impact on the workload, by making that change?
It's an interesting question. I guess I'll have to ponder it for a little bit and get you an answer back.
I knew I wouldn't have an answer today, Scott.
But what I can do though is I can commit to getting you some research and statistics on the duplexes that have come in terms of cases in the ECA, and also what the results have been in terms of their approvals.
Okay. Any other commissioner questions at this point? Yes, then I would call for public comment from the room. Anyone in the room who might want to speak on this item? Mr. Gallion. Okay. Would you go to the podium for us, please, and just for the record, state your name? Because if we don't know you, we should. Thank you, Wes.
Some people wish they didn't. I'm Wes Gallion, President of the Builders Association. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Looking at this process, there's one thing I wanted to get clarified, because I'm not sure. There were requirements, they've been pulled back, not recommended now by the staff. Does the DAB board still get that information in spite of the process?
Yeah, good question. So what we're doing is we've committed to not include those in the staff reports. So it's not in any of the communications that we provide, and that being the staff report is the way that what we share with the DABs. So the same staff report that the MAPC receives is exactly the same one that the DABs do. We don't do a special one for the DABs. So by not including it in the MAPC staff report, it's not included in the ones that are presented to the DABs.
Thank you, Scott. This has become a pretty contentious issue on the part of the builders and developers who buy land or lots in the ECA and want to build duplexes like the ones that are built on the urban fringe. I think the issue what caused probably the biggest concern is the design standards, which create a couple default items. If you don't comply with those, you can't build the duplex that you would otherwise build. That's just the way it is. And those duplexes that they want to build in the inner city, for the most part, are the same ones built on the urban fringe. They're not necessarily the most attractive things, but they are the duplexes that they can build cost effectively on an infill lot, get a decent return on their investment, get people living in them, and they build them in such a way that they want to buffer the noise from the street by having the garages in the front for the most part. They want garages because they want people to be able to put their cars there and avoid vandalism and things of that nature, and keep trash that they'd otherwise put in, outside, and not just trash, but cookers and that sort of thing sitting around the sides of the duplexes in the front yard, clutters up the place. In years past, that's been a concern of homeowners and saying people live in the area. They say, well, problem with duplexes is the people in them just store all their stuff outside and it looks like hell. So that's why they went to garages. Why Habitat went to single car garages in their houses was part of that, and the security issue and everything else. I think the standards, the criteria needs to be changed from a standard to a criteria that is flexible in terms of looking at designs, given the features of housing and that sort of thing in a certain neighborhood. And if zoning were to be changed, as Ann suggested, and there was a 2 or 3 person committee of staff, or a builder of duplexes or developer of them comes in, sits down, says, these are the features that exist throughout the area. How many of those can we incorporate into the design area and get away from the absolute default language and those things that if you don't, it doesn't matter what you do, otherwise, if you don't do this, you can't build it. Because what that's caused these developers to do is say, we're done building it. We won't build in the inner city. We'll build on the urban fringe. We don't have to put up with it. So that's where it's at. I don't know if any more dialogue is needed. I think during the time we were meeting over a period of 2 years, there was a ton of people had an opportunity to say a lot of things about a lot of issues. I think the big issue with duplexes is that neighborhoods don't like them and they don't like the people that live in them. And we can't fix that. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Wes. Anyone else with public comment on this item?
Just a quick clarification question. What does ECA stand for?
That excellent question. That's the Established Central Area of Wichita. It's trying to identify those places where residential housing has, been around for a while. And it basically is from Ridge Road on the east or west to Rock on the east, and 29th north and Pawnee south, 31st Street south. Yeah, on the map. There you go. I'm losing it, people. I used to know that like in my sleep. All right, commission, anyone else online who would like to comment on this item? And really the process, do we need to go back to DABS to gather further input from the neighborhoods is the question? No.
On this, just a quick clarification. So what we're proposing is today we're at advanced plans. We would have then another meeting of advanced plans where individuals and groups would be invited to come and share public comments about the proposal. And then later on at the full MAPC, and then the third stop would be the city council. At this point, we're not proposing that it would go to the DABS as part of the process.
And the proposal is that a recommendation for design standards would continue to be included in the staff report so that that issue could be raised as we go on a case-by-case basis.
That's the question. So
okay.
That would be what we're looking for is thumbs up, thumbs down, basically, from these groups.
All right, Commission, you understand the situation, and what is your thought? Mr. McKay?
My only comment is this, and you've all in this room heard this before. We have an incentive to do the infill in this core area that we're talking about. And then we turn around and start throwing all kinds of rules and regulations that these people are willing to go in there, spend their time, their money, and effort where they could go out our edge without near as much expense, and a lot easier. And so I just don't let us forget that the whole purpose of this thing is to get the infill part of that we're trying to make prettier, nicer than what it is today. And you can't have that done by committee. It's going to have to be done with the individual people that's willing to spend their time, money, and effort. And we've had 2 or 3 meetings about it. And it's been on the planning commission here long enough to know that there's always an NIMBY out there in a group when you go to the public. And that's not in my backyard. I don't want that. And whatever excuse they use or whatever reason they use, it's just they don't want it regardless of what. So.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. Other input from the commission?
I do think that there are areas that sometime are so highly populated with rental properties that the areas have deteriorated. And sometimes when we introduce that use of duplex and introduce more rental properties into an area, we just contribute in a way to that neighborhood declining. On the other hand, I certainly understand that we need infill to happen because we do have dilapidated properties in some of those areas that, something needs to be built there. Duplexes do seem the most practical way to go in order to get a developer to develop in those areas. I guess I'm just kind of saying I really see both sides of this issue. That's it.
Other input? Mr. Hartman?
Well, actually, it comes down to the individuals living there and their responsibility to take care of the property. So I don't know how you can design that.
That takes us to code enforcement, right? Hello, Mr. Hartman. Yes.
So it seems that this is being brought to us to consider whether or not staff should continue to make recommendations on design, specifically on approval on duplexes when they come before the Planning Commission. So I would be prepared to make a motion that the design comments not be included by staff in future minutes. Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion that the staff recommendations not be included in the staff reports. Do you have a question, Scott, or a clarification?
Well, you're certainly able to make that motion and that recommendation. The process that we have is that mapped out is that at another advanced plans meeting, we would invite members of the public and organizations to come and comment on it, but certainly don't have to do that step. We can move it straight to the MAPC if you all would prefer. But I just want to point out that that's what we've got drawn up in the process.
Okay. Mr. Hartman, do we have a second for Mr. Hartman's motion? Mr. Duell's motion, I'm sorry. He wore the same shirt today, kind of. I'm sorry, all white men look alike. I'm sorry. Mr. Duell has a motion on the floor. Do I have a second to his motion to proceed to MAPC with a recommendation, or that the recommendation not be included in the staff reports?
I got a question. What if we just leave it like it is until after we have this second meeting?
I'd be agreeable to withdraw the motion if staff believes that there's benefit from having another meeting of the public. We have certainly heard today from the standpoint of the builders that want to build in infill areas, but I will withdraw the motion if we think we need another meeting.
I think it could be beneficial. I don't know that it's going to change anything in terms of the feedback, but we do know that some of these recommendations are coming from the DABs as well. And so it would give us an opportunity to reach out to neighborhood associations and at least make them aware that the conversation is taking place. Again, I don't know if that's going to result in other folks showing up to provide comments, but at least doing that opportunity then also can lead more. I think it can help the MAPC and the city council to understand that there have been multiple opportunities for members of the public to weigh in on this issue. So it can give them greater confidence going forward with recommendations.
Mr. McKay.
Scott, I think this originally started by DABS, the meeting I was in, it was presented, the DABS wanted this, the council members wanted that, that's been 6 months ago, whenever it was we met. And you can have all the meetings you want to, they're only going to change anybody's minds. I go back to what I said a little bit earlier, you can't have both the best worlds, or whatever that comment is. But there's going to be people, I can guarantee you, there's going to be people come up here, you can build a Taj Mahal, and they don't want it. So
I remember we had a case recently where the developer did come with a new design recommendation, and he, made an adjustment to the appearance of the property. And I think it even became a single family, not a duplex, and still the neighborhood didn't want it. So it seems to me the issue's becoming more about the density than it is about the design necessarily. I don't know.
And maybe what can happen too is, if you all would like, we can shorten up the process. I mean, I think I understand kind of the frustration of having this conversation quite a bit about this one topic. One thing we could do to shorten up this process is simply take it to MAPC, do the notification to the different groups that they can come to the MAPC meeting and be heard there. And then that way it kind of compresses the process a little bit.
I'm all for that.
I think that's a great compromise.
Okay.
Use the full MAPC. I think there's so much, it might be maybe not, but complications of building in the infill area are so difficult for people to understand too. It is so expensive to overcome all the obstacles. So, that's where public comment, sometimes they lack some of that information, and I would hope we would find a way to provide that during the process. So can we go back to Mr. Hartman's recommendation? You want to try again, Mr. Dool?
Yes, I would amend my motion to take this before the MAPC, which invites the public to come in and listen to the issue. I'd just like to say parenthetically, though, a great deal of information was sent out to us on this issue, and it talked extensively about why it's better to have garages in the front than the back, et cetera, et cetera. So I would.
All right, we have a motion forward to MAPC at which public comment would be collected.
I second it.
Second from Mr. Hartman. I'm sorry, what, John? Oh, we have a double. That means any discussion on this item? Any public comment at this? I think we are making this an action item now. I skipped public comment. Well, we had Mr. Gallion at the MAPC meeting, right? We'll defer all public comment to that point on this topic. And thank you, Wes, for coming today. Any commission discussion before I call for a vote?
One last comment.
Yes. Well,
if you remember last planning commission, we had a duplex project out on Greenwich Road. And I mean, it's going to be not an infill, but it's a nice one. And we had people complaining across the street.
Right.
Building just as nice as what they're living in.
Right.
And one guy get up, speak 4 times on 4 different issues just because he was upset with what we did on that issue. So
we are always afraid of what we have not yet met, right?
Yes.
And honestly, I've been reading a lot on what communities are doing to get rid of the NIMBYism that occurs when something different is in our backyard. And there's some very interesting approaches that I'll bring to another meeting. All in favor of the motion as presented by Mr. Dool, please say by an aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There can't be because everyone said aye. Motion passes. Yes,
Scott, at one time, you and I were talking something about inviting the landlords is not in the tenants, or we send a list to the landlords, correct?
I don't.
On the public hearing things.
We certainly can try. I don't know that we could do it to landlords. Would be a little bit more difficult to engage.
Well, no, we were just discussing off the record about we send the notification to the owners of the properties. And not the tenants.
Public notice. Actually, we've got an agenda item today that will touch on that.
Right.
Not specifically on that specific one, but we can certainly talk about it then. Yep.
Hey, the main purpose of our meeting is to go over the comprehensive plan update, which Stephen Banks has been working at diligently, which is making the time go so fast until his retirement because he's so focused. Stephen, will you please take us through the plan update?
All right, Ty-Ben, if you could go to the first map. I included this map because I wanted to show you what has happened over the last 10 years with residential development. And you'll see that the majority of new housing permits have occurred within these bubbles. There are a number of demolitions and some infill within the ECA, but otherwise the majority really fell within the bubbles that we had outlined in the current comprehensive plan. I would like you to note a few areas. I'm showing one area here with the cursor where we kind of missed. There are some others up here. Over in Bel Air, that bubble for some reason went into Bel Air. And I'll be coming back to some of these issues later in the presentation.
Hey, Steve, sorry to interrupt. Can you just provide a brief overview about what the maps are? Just as if folks are trying to keep up, I want to make sure they've got them.
Okay, yeah. This is the future growth concept map that is in the comprehensive plan. This is showing the current existing layer that shows the generalized land use in the background, and then the growth area bubbles over that for employment, for residential development, and those areas that we show as a mixture of residential and employment. The next map shows the
question for you, Stephen.
So the question is, for those who
some of those that say the 2035 Wichita Future Growth Concept Map are using the existing land use layer and the bubbles. And the ones that show the 2045 Wichita Future Growth Concept Study version, most of those are showing the changes. But in this case, the first two maps, it really should have said 2035, not the study version.
So what are the bubbles you're talking about?
The bubbles are those tan and brown areas and the crosshatch areas that are the growth areas on the map.
And Steve, those aren't showing. Those aren't in the first two maps that we have. They're actually in the later maps towards the back.
Okay, did not. They were in the PDF we sent. Were they not?
So if you could just take people through what those.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, there were two other maps in the PDF that should have been printed.
I think they're in the back of that stack.
Oh, in the back. Well, okay. Yeah, they got out of order somehow. Okay, so yeah, the 7th and 8th pages, but they're reversed. The 8th page is the map with the residential, and the 7th page is the map with the commercial. And commercial development was a little bit more scattered, but we realized that a lot of properties within the established central area and all, you get reuse of property. These also reflect addition projects to commercial properties. And so it is a little bit more scattered. Okay, well, going back to the first map in your stack, Tybin, if you could advance to the next, is it the next slide? Yeah, there we go. Okay. This is the existing land use layer in the comprehensive plan. And Tybin, if you could go to the next map and then toggle between these a couple times. The 2045 map is the one that we're proposing for this update. There are some color changes in here, and some of this will become apparent as I go into the next slide. For some reason, public and semi-public and industrial, the colors were so close in the original plan that sometimes they almost just look exactly the same when they get printed or on screen. And so we're proposing a little bit different shades of the blue and purple for those. And also park and open space, a little bit more of a yellow green, because sometimes if you don't have the vacant and park and open space colors on the same map, it's hard to distinguish what that is. So hopefully these changes in colors communicate better what is going on in the maps. It's particularly important when we zoom into areas. Also, in this revised layer, properties that have been subdivided, zoned, and there's some development activity occurring, either infrastructure or permits being pulled, we are changing those properties from vacant to the land use that accompanies that development. This is particularly important in some of the fringe residential areas where the appraiser may show a lot of vacant lots within a subdivision that's being developed. But since the development is being pursued, we think it makes sense to show the intended proposed land use that is actually occurring in that area, so that as you go forward and these things fill in, it's just much more logical. And there were a lot of little things in the current map that showed up, for instance, as park and open space or other things that really didn't make sense. So we're really trying to clean up this layer quite a bit. The other thing is that this layer is being built off of the GIS parcel layer. So it will be much easier to do updates and corrections to this. If there is a problem that comes up in a MAPC meeting or whatever with a portion of the map, it will be easy to go in and make corrections for future cases that would come up in an area. And it also gives us some flexibility if we need to do a set of map changes for the annual comprehensive plan review. We can do that much more easily with what we're doing now. Tybin, if you go to the next map, I'm going to show a couple maps that show how this has changed. And if you'll flip between the next map and this a couple of times, you'll notice how there has been some increase in activity, especially east of Jabara, and then some infill of residential in some of these areas further to the east. And yeah, if you'll go to the the 2045. And we've also tried to mark some of these major creek areas so that you kind of get a little bit understanding of the lay of the land within those areas and what is going on. It's hard to always do that because those aren't always divided out on the parcels. Ben, if you could go to the next map and then flip between that. And this is in southeast Wichita. West of the airport, you'll see the large change in industrial to the bottom of the map and a lot more subdivision activity south of Kellogg. Just kind of showing what some of the changes are in the map. Any questions at this point? This is the land use layer.
I have a question on that. The second map, the 2045 concept map, shows industrial there at 31st Street between Mays and Tyler on the north side. There's pretty nice residential house right in there now. Are they just assuming, I guess this is 20 years down the road, maybe.
Where was that again?
North of 31st Street between Mays and Tyler. On your second map, you're showing it industrial. I know for a fact there's an existing, probably $500,000 house. That's right just west of Tyler in there. Just wondering.
Yeah, I would have
to. Came up with the.
You're talking about west of the airport and the golf course there. Yeah, I would have to check that. And there may be.
Wait a minute. I'm mixed up here. I'm a mile over here. I see it now. I was looking between Mays and 119, so disregard that.
Okay. Well, we'll go then on to the next map. And in looking at these growth areas, we did go to Public Works and Utilities and ask them if there were any changes that they thought would be necessary in these maps, whether there were limitations to what they thought they could extend to areas, or if they're seeing requests in certain areas for services. And they were really very slight changes. And those are shown in red here. Up in the northeast, there was some changes that we did there. You'll notice the area that's a little bit more tan on the north side of that bubble that extends over toward the county line. There are issues within that area as you go to 29th Street where there is a ridge that would make it kind of impractical to add the infrastructure necessary. It would require multiple pump stations to serve that area. And unless you get a really good number of new development in there, it's not practical at this time to extend service. So it's kind of a premature situation. Also, there are landowners up there that say, we're not at all thinking about selling right now. We're looking at holding on to this land long term. So, but there were other developers that were trying to assemble and do projects in that area. So we modified that area accordingly. Up to the north as you go toward the intersection of 235 and K96, we did add a area of residential employment mix. And that is a project that is being pursued at this time. And we added that bubble in to show that in there. And then there was a project to the west of 151st Street, and then to the south of 47th Street South, where they are actually pursuing projects with developers to go into those areas. Those changes in total, it was a 1.3% increase in the area for the residential employment mix and a 0.43% increase in area for the residential growth areas. So not very significant. Next slide, please. There were some other things we wanted to look at, and I changed the colors a little bit on this next map, hopefully making it a little easier to read. The green that you see on the map is where we have adjusted, actually decreased the area of the current bubbles. The green is showing where those bubbles are now, and the red is showing the increase, both those that I showed you in the current or the previous map, as well as here. Did several adjustments on here. One, the new water treatment plant over by Zoo Boulevard and west of 235, land use there, land use change there. We also looked at a couple of other areas where major institutional, actually schools, both for Mays and another school out east up there at, that would be 45th Street North and Hillside, or east of Hillside. And then we also looked at the floodway maps. In 2016, after this plan was adopted, the city adopted new floodway maps, actually floodplain maps that were developed by the Corps of Engineers and are the current maps we're using now. Because some of these areas, particularly in the Northwest, were in significant areas of floodway. And Tybin, if you'll flip to the next map, I'll show you those areas. These were significant areas. They weren't the narrower areas, which would be easy to go over with a culvert or other things, but areas that you would definitely not want to put houses in. The Corps of Engineers would really be on you for that. So we adjusted some of those areas, and taking all of these things into account, wanted to get back to the total area that we had in the original maps. I went ahead and then put bubbles around those areas where we have seen development, the Auburn Hills area, this area just south of the Mays schools, some of these other areas that were not caught in the original bubbles. And the idea is to bring these bubbles more into line so that they show growth within the entire planning period, which is basically from 2015 through 2045 if we adopt these changes. Taking all these things into account, the total change between these proposed bubbles and the previous bubbles is 0.25% less area. So a very small, insignificant decrease in the total area that we're representing. So in terms of area, we're representing the same amount of area for development, just bringing it more in line with some of the things that have occurred and taking care of some of these things that we would want to take account of anyway. Any questions?
I want to make sure I understand. If a new development is approved, it's a multifamily development. Now that will show as already being there because it's already zoned for that land use.
Mm-hmm.
So does that then get counted as growth area even when it's not yet filled in? I mean, the land use will be there, but when you look at growth, you'll still be counting actually completed activity.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So the land use assigned to, or the amount of land represented is staying very, very close to the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you are more accurately reflecting what's actually there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
According to what's actually happened versus what we predicted would happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And really, some of these areas, like the Auburn Hills area, we should have probably gone back and accounted for the number of vacant lots and things that, you know, were in that development at the time. But we didn't do that. This was a pen exercise that we did with the Plan Steering Committee, and we were looking at what are some new areas to be developed. But we should have gone back and looked at the vacant lot and other things that said, well, here's a cluster that is likely to come online within this planning period, and put one of those dots that represented 100 homes, you know, at those points. And there are a number of other tiny developments that are much less in number, but I wanted to at least capture the larger developments that, you know, were closer to that 100 dwelling units to bring into these bubbles.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Scott? Or I mean for Gal, I'm just not doing names today. Other questions for our speaker? Let's just be really safe right here. Any comment from the public on the material just presented? Hearing none. Yeah, Mary.
Stephen, I think maybe we've discussed this before, but when it comes to the land use and something's been platted, it has the right zoning, the intention of the developer is to build, you know, so many single family homes in a place, but it takes time to build them. So do we count them as a done deal when the platting and zoning is done, or are we waiting until all the homes are built, which may not happen for a long time?
Actually, the way this land use layer was updated, I went through and looked at recent subdivision activity and went to areas looking for, is it subdivided, is it zoned, is there permit activity? In other words, are we seeing houses or other development there, or at least roads going in, before I changed it from vacant to that land use. And so once those criteria have been satisfied, then I counted it as that land use, whether it's residential or commercial, industrial, whatever, and changed it from vacant to that land use so that it's current as to what the intention is for that development. If it didn't get to the stage of at least showing some roads or other activity on a subdivision, I left it blank because we do have a number of, not very many, but a number of dead subdivisions, stuff that got platted, maybe zoned, but nothing's happening there. And so it's just ag right now or vacant.
I also think, I can recommend that you've done a good job is what you can, because this is a moving target constantly.
Oh, yeah.
And you used Auburn Hills a while ago. Well, we started Auburn Hills in '95 and just finished it last year. But it was 800 and some odd acres of ground over a long period of time. So that makes a big difference. But my question is, was it 5 or 6, 7 or 8 years ago, something like that? Our zoning, especially for commercial and stuff, you had to plat it within a year, was it, or 2 years, something like that, in fact. And so we changed that rule to where, because people come from outside the city, said, I got this piece of commercial ground. Well, they may not be able to do it, plat it in a year, and you still get an extension, but it just kind of took that equation away person. So that's when we changed the rule, it was what, 4 or 5 years ago, that we'd get a plat, the commercial would get platted, and it'd be showing maps that it's commercial. That way it's easier to market, and we don't have, we're doing it, I guess we're just doing it a little more upfront than after the fact. So, no, I think you've done a wonderful job on this thing. I really do.
Any other comments for Stephen? I think we're looking for an action from this committee to, I'm sorry. We have another stage of presentation.
No, it's a great question. I'm going to check in with Steve on the recommended action. It's review and provide comments. Is that right? Are you looking?
And basically we'll be looking probably the next meeting in a couple of weeks to recommend this and the population forecast to MAPC. We do have another element, the financial element, and I am still waiting to get feedback from finance on that, and we'll have to keep you in the loop as to whether or not we get that or how we might handle that element of the update. But a final recommendation to MAPC can wait till the next meeting on the 15th. 15th?
Okay. So it really changes to the coloring in the map, the updates of the land uses, et cetera. We've seen all that, and any additional questions or concerns about those changes? I love the color changes. Thank you. Thank you. It really does make it more distinct. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it really becomes an issue sometimes on the screen, depending upon the projector. And I've had I printed out a map yesterday. I could not tell the difference between the industrial and the institutional. And it could be misleading. So I thought, yeah, definitely a change is needed.
I move we accept the proposed map.
Second. We have a motion to approve from Mr. Hartman, second from Mr. McKay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Stephen. Consider that a vote for good job and keep on keeping on. We are now to the Wichita zoning case notification policies. Scott, please overview what we currently do.
You bet. And Mr. McKay really foreshadowed this one with some of his comments earlier. So I think we've got a good introduction. This is coming to you, I'll tell you right away, this is coming to you because a council member brought this up during one of the city council meetings. And so we're following up on their request, but also I think that's based on comments that have come from different DAB meetings. So you'll see that in just a moment. So next slide. What we're asking for, same thing, receive and file, but please provide comments. We always look to you for recommendations, thoughts on proposed changes and processes. On this one, we don't have any proposed changes that we're bringing to you. This is very early in the process. We just want to check in with you and let you know that there's interest in revisiting these, or at least looking at them. Next step, please, or next slide, please. So we're going to go over the interest in this, the current practice, and then potential or proposed process for having a community discussion about it. Next slide, please. So on July 19th of this year, it was brought up city council meeting, request about, hey, where are we on this? And so that's really what's prompting this conversation, just the start of this. And I believe that, again, that's based on comments that council members are hearing from members of the public and at their district advisory board meetings. And I believe we had that even more recently at the most recent MAPC meeting a couple of weeks ago. We had individuals saying, hey, well, I didn't get noticed. So I think there's some things we can do on the staff end, but I think it's also just a review of what our existing policies are and whether they're meeting community needs. Next slide, please. So zoning process, you're very familiar with that. Application comes in, goes to planning commission, goes to district advisory board, city council, and then whether or not it gets sent back or whether it gets approved. Just very high level. Next slide. Public participation, there's a variety of different ways that we do notification of public participation opportunities. You're familiar with all of these. I won't spend a lot of time, but needless to say, yard signs, letters, a variety of different meetings that folks can attend. And some are policy and some are practice. And in fact, there's the notification area. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the future. We've got some interesting news on that one. So next slide. You're familiar with the sign. Next slide. This is an MAPC policy. And so the duration is 13 days prior to the public hearing. So next slide. A notification letter. So that one is according to Kansas statutes. For a city case, the minimum distance is 200 feet, and for a county case, it's 1,000 feet. So same as the protest areas. However, the city of Wichita, the distance can be increased, and city council and MAPC weighed in on this many, many years ago with a policy on this. And it depends on the number of acres. So next slide. So there's a table about this, and based on the acreage, determines how far out the notice goes. Now, one of the things that we found out in doing research for this is that Mary and JR had gone through and looked at the MAPC policies, and we've got this in terms of it's on the application form, so you agree to that when you submit the application, but the formal policy, we have not found a copy of that yet. So we've done some digging, and we found out that it was in the minutes from the MAPC and then was sent to the city council, and that the city council took action on it. So we have the minutes from both of those meetings indicating that, but it is not something that we had in our record books when we looked. So I'm glad to provide the update that we found it, though, at least in the minutes. So it goes back quite some time. Then next slide. Okay, there we are. So purpose for the notification letter is, again, this is sent out to property owners. And I think that was a comment, Mr. McKay, about property owners. And you'll notice, so a property owner could be someone down in Florida and not necessarily at the property. And then that the addresses are provided from a title company. So that's one thing to be very, that we try and be cognizant of as part of this process, is that the applicants are required to get that list from a title company. So they they have the expense of getting that generated and providing those addresses to us so we can send out the notification letters. Next slide.
Scott, do you know if the title company has requirement to keep the address of the person, a person, versus an LLC or other thing that kind of disguises who the real owner is?
I believe they go off the property records, and so they send it to the address based on the property records.
So that could be an LLC, not a person. Okay. Thank you.
The other ways that notification is provided is a published notice. And then next slide. And this provides notification about the commission meeting and what cases are on, what public hearings items are on that agenda. And again, this is required by Kansas statute. So next slide. So the comment that we heard from the city council meeting was really it was looking at a question about the notification distances, and it was specifically focused just on the letters. And so what we're really looking at this conversation to be about is that distance appropriate? And that's part of the conversation that we would like to kick off or start with you. And then the second part of it is also, I think while we're looking at distance, it gives us an opportunity to look at content and what those letters look like, because that's one thing that we receive phone calls from the general public, and they'll say, I've received this letter, but I don't understand what it's about. Can you help me understand? And so there's a lot of legal language that's in there. We're trying to address some of that with the update to the bylaws and how that's going to help with the agenda information. But I think taking a second look at the letter content could be helpful. So next slide. So this is one of probably, I think, 5 different flow diagrams that you've seen in this meeting, but they're all very, very similar in that. But for this one, I think what I'd like to do is spend some time with you at each of your meetings talking about different things here, because we don't have a ready recommendation about changes. We want to have the conversation with you to go through what it currently is and what would be changed. So number one is right now where we are. We've done an introduction of the existing policies. So kind of in short order here, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward. The second thing, at another meeting, future meeting, we'd like to come to you with what the state of the practice is in other communities. So just a review of what is Hutchinson doing? What is Lawrence doing? What are other communities in Kansas doing? And then also what are maybe some best practices across the country that maybe we could learn from. And then 3 would be to look at different options. And through these, we would like to look at not only the notification area, but also what would be the costs? So what would be the impacts of any changes, right? So what would be the cost? What would be the amount of how properties that would be notified? Those kind of factors as well. And then we'd like to work with you. Number 4 is to have some draft recommendations that would come out of advanced plans. We have district advisory board here as an opportunity to collect input. I'm not necessarily sure. We'll have to iron out this process as we go forward. But for right now, at some point, checking in with the DABs, because we know that a lot of those comments about notification, at least in personal experience from being at the DABs, I know that that comes up quite a bit there. And then bring those comments back to you. And then I've got city council, but really I should have taking it to the full planning commission. One thing also to consider too, and I'm not sure where it fits in here, but I think there are options that we can do as staff that will help with this. And one of those might be to include a map when we're doing presentations about cases, to do a map that shows what the notification area was for the case. Because I think just like we had at the MAPC meeting, the gentleman came up and said, well, I never heard about this. Well, I think sometimes if we can show a map that shows what properties were in the notification area, that might help resolve kind of those questions or issues right away. So, so maybe there are other things that we can look at too, in addition to just the distances and what's in the letter. So, so next slide. So again, this it's an opportunity to just receive and file as recommended action, but as always, just looking for feedback and thoughts on the process. So Ty Ben, if you want to go back one slide, and then I'll stand for any questions.
I really personally want one of those. Portable neon. Oh. Sign blew away, or
yes.
they didn't see the sign.
And you'll notice that we've got this segregated to be just about the letters, but I do anticipate that there will be comments about the signs. But if you want to, we can try and tackle it at the same time. But I was thinking we might break it up into two different things because there's a lot of details associated with each. So.
And maybe neon envelope. Maybe the envelope needs to be orange, you know?
What we was talking about earlier was the fact that the landlord gets the notice, not the tenant.
Right.
But the tenant's the one that always comes up and complaining, normally. Of course, you're not going to win that fight.
Yeah. Yes. Comment.
And this is just a comment. I realize it's a state statute that requires published notice of these. Is the Wichita Eagle the source that we publish in here?
And that is a third thing probably to talk about, letters, signs, and public notice. So excellent thing to bring up. We've actually had there's been some challenges with getting things published. At least there were 2 years ago when I first started. There were some real headaches that were taking place. I think things have gotten a lot better in terms of getting our billing and getting affidavits, because we need to get proof that it was published just for our records. There was conversation about possibly looking at other publishing options, including possibly even online publication. So I think that those are conversations that are still taking place. But yeah, that's very much part of it too.
Well, in reality, it's just a waste of time and money because the readership of the Eagle is very low now. I'm not sure what the alternatives are, but as we move forward into a more electronic society, the Eagle is not the answer.
Point recorded. And here. Any other comments or feedback at this point for staff as they begin to address a complex issue?
Well,
hearing none, thank you, Scott, for tackling this.
You bet. Thank you. And we will work on coming up with research on the state of the practice, and then we will return to y'all to let you know what we find out.
The publication is a state or that's a state mandate?
That is state required. There's a state statute that requires
and so we could each speak to our representatives about that state requirement. I'm sure it's a high priority to get rid of that thing, right?
I believe there's also been questions also about the home rule ability that the city of Wichita has and whether that gives us any additional flexibility. So that may be another way to look at it as well.
Okay, thank you. All righty, we have 5 minutes. We have updates from staff. You received some printed updates. Is there anything does anyone have any questions about the remaining staff updates that were sent to you on short-term rental, nightclub in the city, places for people, or MAPD? Any questions or comments from anyone? Thank you for reading. Any other public comment? We have some other guests in the audience who haven't spoken. Anything you'd like to comment on today? Yeah. Okay. Anybody online that has public comment?
I do.
Okay, will you state your name and address for the record, please? And you have 3 minutes.
Of course. My name is Kelly Reed. I live at 510 North Bay Country Street in Wichita. coming to you today in interest of your update in terms of short-term rentals on your agenda today. Just curious about a couple of things. One would be stakeholder engagement for hosts and guests. I haven't seen a real concerted effort to engage with other stakeholders other than those who have been in district advisory meetings and those that the city has presented some plans for. And then two, I'd like to maybe get an update on where we are with the proposal that Scott Wadle had brought forward for the new policies and regulations.
Okay, great. Thanks for your comment, and I'll just give it right to you, Scott.
Yeah, sure. Where we are on that is that we're still in the process of looking at alternatives. We haven't really kicked off the stakeholder engagement process yet, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be in a good position to do that this fall, maybe winter. So we look forward to bringing some updates to you on that as well.
And by having her in the record, she'll get notified as that process moves forward. Does that work from this committee level, or
probably one of the best things to do is sign up for the planning department emails, the same email system that you would have used to get a copy, if you did, to get an email copy of the agenda or notice of the agenda. That'd probably be the best way.
Okay, is that helpful, Kelly?
It is in some ways, yes, but I guess what I'm looking for is a very intentional effort to engage with this specific group of stakeholders who may be hosts. That may be different, you know, so that was the one thing I was really looking for as a focus group, perhaps, recommended focus group for that. And then also, just in terms of items on the agenda, of course, would be, you know, taking a peek at what's coming up in the fall as well. I wanted to also mention that I'm coming to you in my capacity today as a community leader for Airbnb. I've been appointed as a volunteer community leader for the Wichita area. So I'd really like to stay connected to this policy as it moves forward.
Okay, great. Thanks for stepping up and accepting some leadership on the topic.
Thank you.
Anyone else with public comment today on the items on our agenda? Hearing none. Anything else from the commission? Yes, Mr. Dewell.
I believe that we needed a quorum to approve the minutes of the last meeting, right?
Right. And we did have a quorum at that time. We did that so rapidly fast, you didn't even know what you were saying yes to, it sounds like. All right, thank you. Anything else for the good of the cause? The meeting is over. You are adjourned. I don't get a hammer, but here we go.
Sure. Question about rural water district. I'm not super familiar with the details, but I believe there's been a program set up where the city, maybe through a similar format as like special assessments, helps to pay them back for their infrastructure investments. So I believe the folks in Public Works would probably have the specifics on that, but from what I've heard, it doesn't appear like it's.
Yeah, and that's continuing. And what I've understand is the Northeast